Jane is an associate professor in interdisciplinary arts and sciences at UW-Tacoma. She's got a lot of great trainings under her belt in compassion and resilience and self-compassion. So we're super excited to learn more from you, Jane. I'm gonna let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Anna, and it's good to see everybody and be back with you all. So thanks for inviting me. It was really helpful to see your check-ins, and I see that there's a lot of busyness, tiredness, anxiety, and exhaustion, which sounds about right. Congratulations for taking this time, because this is a little bit of time to take a breather and hopefully kind of nurture and tend to some of those challenging experiences in this supportive community. So thanks for showing up for yourself and for each other. So let me show you what I have planned for today, and then we'll go straight ahead and start with the settling practice. So just share my screen for a second. So what we're going to do today is we'll start with a 10-15 minute settling practice, seeing as everybody sounds like most people sound like they're pretty strung out, just to kind of calm down and take a breather. Then we'll review the 3 steps of self-compassion, and today we're going to focus on the 3rd step, self-compassion, which is self-kindness. And then once we've learned a little bit about the whys and what that is and what that isn't, we will dive right in and have an attempt at putting all this together with the self-compassion letter exercise. And then we will get into little groups and have a chance to debrief, because it's kind of hard in a big group. You can get a little bit lost and to connect with other people. So we'll do that, and then we'll bring it back to the whole group to finish up. Any questions so far? Any requests? Anything wrong with the sound? Everything? I'm totally up for questions. Or okay, so shoot things to me in chat if you have questions all the way through, or sometimes I can't see all the chat because I've got like so many different things going on my screen. So don't be afraid also to just take yourself off mute and call out. Okay, so let's start with a relaxation settling exercise. I'm going to stop the share right now. I'm going to keep my camera on, but you are welcome to have keep yours off or whatever feels good for you. And just take this time to settle down and try to bathe in the fact that there's nothing you have to do right now except be present to your experience. No doubt your mind might be going 100 miles an hour, but that's okay. So one thing we can do to help us relax is take a few deeper than usual breaths. So you might try to count into the count of 3. And on your out breath, make the out breath a little bit longer. So maybe count to 4 on your out breath. Obviously doing this as it's comfortable, not straining yourself. So if 3 is too long or too short, then adjust. But the point is to make the out breath a little bit longer than the in breath, because that helps to slow us down and calm our nervous systems. If you're feeling physically quite tense, something that can be helpful to add to this practice is to lift up your shoulders around your ears when you breathe in, tensing a bit, and then on the out breath, letting that go. And doing that a few more times and really feeling the relaxation on the let go and letting that pervade your whole being. Allowing yourself to really settle into the relative quiet of this time. And if your mind is all over the place, that's totally normal. It's not a problem. It'll settle down of its own accord in good time. You're just creating the conditions to make that more possible. Becoming aware of your body being supported by whatever you're sitting or maybe even lying on. Tuning into a sense of stability, feet on the ground, supported by the earth. Your body supported by the chair or the ground. And you might even try to visualize, if you're quite a visual person, visualize something that represents stability for you, like maybe a deeply rooted tree or a mountain. Feeling that quality of stability in your being. And if you're having a hard time bringing that, tuning into that feeling of stability within you, that's fine. Just bringing it to mind as a kind of intention is a good start. Now we're going to move on to a focus on spaciousness. So you might start with becoming aware of the spaciousness as you breathe. Can you feel as you breathe in how your lungs expand? Bringing a sense of spaciousness into your body. And as you exhale, being mindful of the air you're breathing out, moving into the space around you. And becoming conscious of the space around you. The spaciousness in your room. And then if it feels comfortable for you, progressively zooming out so you see yourself in the context of a wider and wider space. Maybe the city you're in. Becoming aware of the sky, the atmosphere around you. The continent you're in. The oceans around you. And even if you're feeling really imaginative, seeing us on this tiny little speck of a planet in the universe. Touching into a sense of spaciousness in whatever way feels comfortable and natural for you. And feeling that in your body. And then finally, we'll move to the quality of warmth. And that's particularly pertinent for this session. So you can scan your body for any sensations of warmth. And something you might do if you find that challenging, or just to create a stronger sense of this, is to experiment with putting your heart on your hand on your heart or your chest. And feeling the warmth that comes from that contact. Another thing you might do is cradle one hand in the other, holding your own hand, I guess, in a kind of soothing way. And allowing that sense of warmth to just slide around and grow and grow in your experience. And then the very last step for this practice is to intensify this feeling of warmth, hopefully, by bringing to mind somebody or something that represents for you something very compassionate, kind. So it could be a relative who's living or dead, somebody with whom you felt very connected, was very kind to you. Or it could be an animal, or even a place. Some people get that sensation from favorite trees. Or you could even, if it's significant for you, bring to mind a spiritual or religious figure. Who you choose doesn't really matter, or what you choose, as long as you associate this person with kindness and compassion. So once you've chosen this person, this compassionate image, really put yourself in your mind's eye in the presence of this compassionate image. And allow yourself to feel being the recipient of that compassion. See yourself through their eyes. This can be quite an emotional experience for some people, and if you're feeling that a little bit verklempt, that's kind of normal. So just allow it to be. If you're feeling overwhelmed, then step back and just focus on your breathing. Allowing yourself to be the recipient of this kindness and compassion in your mind's eye. And then slowly bringing your attention back to your body sitting here. Your breathing happening. And if your eyes are closed, then maybe opening them and reorienting to the screen. And just bring your attention back. Okay, welcome back. What we are going to focus on today is that sense of kindness. One of the reasons we did that compassionate image exercise was to prime us. We know what it's like, hopefully, we all know what it's like to receive compassion, but we can find it very challenging to give it to ourselves. So, first, starting by remembering what it's like to feel compassion kind of primes our systems for getting in that compassion mode. And now we're going to pay attention to how we might encourage ourselves to bring that quality of kindness to our own experience. So I'm going to share the screen again. I'm going to try. Okay, where are we? Here. Okay. So you might remember that way back in January, it seems like a long time ago, Danny came and gave us a lovely talk about the first step of self-compassion, which is mindful awareness. So acknowledging that there is suffering present and allowing it to be. That's the first step, is seeing that it's there. So in terms of how that shows up in your experience, it would be recognizing when there's pain or suffering. This hurts. Not exaggerating it, not ignoring it, not being in denial, but not even judging it. Just, oh, okay, this is painful. Then in February session, we looked at common humanity. And this was, if you remember, the sense that we're not alone. So often when we are in pain or distress, it comes with a sense of isolation. And we tend to think of ourselves as being freakishly beset by this problem, and we get into comparing mode, like, oh, nobody else gets this, and what's wrong with me? And that's just the nature of the beast of being in having a sense of threat and anxiety, suffering. A great way to counteract that is to focus on the fact that other people also experience this thing. Even if you're not proud of it, even if it's something that you wish you weren't experiencing, I bet there's not a person on this world who hasn't had an emotion or a feeling that they wish they weren't having. But there you go, that's life, we all get them. So everybody has that. And so today we're going to the final step, and this is really what makes compassion compassion and not just empathy, onto actually being kind to ourselves. And this can be, as many of you might know, pretty challenging. So we're looking here for, it's not a sense of, oh, everything I do is amazing. It's not a sense of kind of denial or being a Pollyanna-ish. It's a sense of treating ourselves with understanding, not a critical judgment. Another little reminder in terms of our neurobiology. So we have these different emotional regulation systems, and we touched on this last time too. There's the incentive and resource seeking system, the threat and self-protection system, and the caring and soothing system. When we are in a sense of, when we start to be self-critical of ourselves, I'm being self-critical about that sentence, we get into the threat and self-protection system, and that actually, as you might have noticed experientially, makes us close down, feel less connected with people, and it's not a pleasant place to hang out, right? Self-esteem is not the same as self-compassion. Self-esteem is contingent upon our performance and our comparison with other people. So while when we're feeling self-compassionate, we can feel the sense of contentedness and happiness. That's great, but that's not the same as thinking, oh, I'm the greatest at this. Self-compassion is unconditionally kind, no matter what the circumstances. And self-compassion really activates this system, the caring and soothing system. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So, self-kindness, it is not self-judgment. And what's interesting, I wonder how many of you can relate to this image, being weighed down by your own expectations on yourself, or maybe they're social expectations, but sometimes we can add an extra layer of weight to our own experience, our own expectations. So it's treating ourselves with warmth and kindness, especially when we are suffering, failing, or feeling inadequate. And that can be the time when it's actually hardest to do it, because you get into that mode of thinking, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this. That's especially when you need to do this. But it's also when it's especially difficult to do. Self-kindness is realistic. And by that we mean that it's not saying that, if I just say positive affirmations and things, then, then the thing that didn't work out was really fine. It's not true that wasn't a great session, or that wasn't a great test that I took. It's not denying challenging things. It's not even denying that if you've had a failure that happened, but it's recognizing that those imperfections are part of life. So it's different from saying, oh, I just have to get everything right. It's saying I won't always get everything right, because I'm a human being, and human beings just don't get everything right. And that's part of life. And it's part of life that happens to all of us. And I'm not unusual. And it's okay for me not to be perfect, just as I recognize it's okay for other people not to be perfect. So it's realistic. And that helps us move out of a shame spiral into a more of a growth mindset. We're learning from those challenging experiences. So this makes a more balanced and happier foundation from which to move forwards. And what we know from self-criticism is that it puts us in that mode of fight or flight. So the threat mode is activated. And when we're in threat mode, we're basically biologically kind of trying to keep ourselves together and alive. And we don't have that much bandwidth for reaching out to others or engaging in other pursuits, right? So it's actually harder to perform when we're in that mode. So self-criticism is not actually a very effective motivator, even though we often kind of feel like it is. I kind of like this slide. One of the challenges about self-compassion is to even be self-compassionate about the fact you find it hard to be self-compassionate, right? Kind of like layers and layers. But I like this gynotherapist chair. I hate being so self-critical. Yeah, this little slide I thought was kind of getting at this point that self-compassion is leading us away from pathological perfectionism, right? That it's okay to make mistakes, and that everybody does that. The inner critic, as we talked about, activates our stress and fear response. And the research about this is pretty clear. And again, the person who I really recommend you check out if you're interested in delving more into this is Kristin Neff. And she has a site called self-compassion.org. She's a professor at University of Texas in Austin, psychologist. There's loads more resources about this on her site. But she talks about the research that indicates it just doesn't really work to treat yourself with kind of this tough love. It's actually, kindness is a much more effective motivator. Thanks, Anna, for putting that up there. So a much more effective way to motivate ourselves into becoming the kind of person we want to be, we aspire to be, is actually an attitude of friendliness, because that activates the approach and connection systems. And when we're in this kind of happier, more connected place, it's much more conducive to us taking the actions, like the pro-social actions and the health promoting behaviors that actually support where we want to go, what we want to do. So I was happy to hear that Tony Adkins is coming, and I'd love to see that, and his focus on positivity. And that's so important. What we're learning now about from positive psychology is that our brain's on happy 30% more productive and effective than our brains when they're stressed or unhappy or neutral even. So in fact, even if you were just using performance as a measure, which I have kind of issues, is that's your measure of self-esteem, but even if you were using that, it's in your best interests to be friendly, kind to yourself. I want to show you a little clip now from Kristen Neff. It's a short clip from a longer YouTube TED talk that she does, but I think it's very pertinent, so I will show this to you. I'm going to stop the share and show it a different way. Okay, where's it gone? Okay. I hope the sound will work. Share sound. Okay.
There's another thing I'd like to talk about with this idea of motivating ourselves with self-criticism that I think is worth paying attention to. One of the things, I think one of the reasons we're so attached to our self-criticism, even though it's painful, is because it gives us the illusion of control. You shouldn't have failed. Oh, that means theoretically it's possible that I would never fail. It's just because I did something wrong. You shouldn't have made a mistake. You shouldn't have been this. You shouldn't have been that. We love the illusion that it's theoretically possible to be perfect, to never have things go wrong, to do everything we want to do. Just a show of hands, how many of you, if you could snap your fingers and get rid of your absolute worst trait that you don't like about yourself, would do it? Why wouldn't you? If we had so much control, why are we still doing it? Because we don't have that much control. We have a little wiggle room, but not much. Our genes, our early history, our culture, our stress level. There's so many reasons why it's hard to be exactly who we want to be, right? But somehow when we criticize ourselves, we feel that, well, maybe if I just tried that little bit harder, I could be perfect. And that's not reality. Okay, so self-compassion takes a different approach. First of all, self-compassion is about self-acceptance. I fully accept myself as I am, flaws and all. I have compassion, kindness, love, even though I'm not perfect, even though I don't fail. And self-compassion is not about self-improvement or evaluating yourself. Am I good enough or not? Trying to do more and more and more so I can see myself positively. It really is about accepting who you are as you are. Okay, well, does that contradict what I just said about motivation? Doesn't self-acceptance mean being passive, being complacent? Doesn't acceptance just mean acceptance? Well, yeah, it does, right? So if you accept things as they are, then how does that help motivate, make a change, right? And Carl Rogers talked about this very beautifully. The curious paradox, and it is a paradox, is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change, right? And if you think of what's happening there, when we accept ourselves fully and we embrace who we are, flaws and all, then it actually does allow us to see ourselves clearly, because it's safe to see ourselves clearly, and because we care about ourselves and don't want to suffer, we're going to try as much as possible to make changes that are, make us healthier and happier. But we also know that if we don't succeed, it's still okay. Right, so there's not this pressure of you are a bad person unless you change. Yeah, it'd be great if you could change, you'd be happier, but I accept you regardless, right? And so sometimes I think of the way self-compassion is useful for motivating is it plants seeds. It plants seeds of, I'd really like not to suffer so much. I'd really like to be happier. I'd really like to be more fulfilled in this area. So I'm going to water those seeds with a sense of care and nurturance and kindness. But I know at the end of the day, I don't have total control whether or not that tree is going to grow. But I'm going to do what I can.
Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I liked that slide because that clip, because she really addresses that common myth that self-compassion means you're like cutting yourself too much slack and that you'll be complacent. And in fact, she's demonstrating from what she's discovered from her research that having a sense of being safety that comes from self-compassion makes it easier to see yourself clearly and to affect the changes that you'd like to make. So we kind of, most of us culturally, I think, have really bought into this idea that you have to like be really strict with yourself to get things done, but that actually that's not, if strict means being harsh and self-critical, that's not the case. It's not actually that effective. So in a moment, I'm going to encourage us to go through an exercise, a self-compassion letter writing exercise, but I just wanted to take a quick pause for questions here in case anybody has any questions or comments or things that resonated they wanted to share. Feel free to put them in chat or to just speak out. I'll give just 30 seconds here to give you time. Okay, seems like no, everybody good. Okay, so now we're going to try and put this into practice, and then you'll have a chance to talk it through with others, how your experience was. So we're going to do one of the exercises that Kristen Neff recommends, which is a self-compassion letter writing exercise. I actually sent that along to you after the last session. I don't know if any of you tried it. If you did, please try again. It's the sort of thing that every time you do it, you get your self-compassion training gets a little bit stronger. So the first thing is to think of something that's kind of bugging you right now, something that's causing you some suffering. But choose something that's, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, choose something that's like on a 5 or less. So if 10 is like, this is overwhelmingly suffering, I'm totally preoccupied by it, and 1 is like, this is no problem at all, choose something that's under a 5, because we don't want you to be getting overwhelmed in the middle of your workday. So once you've thought about that, you now have the thing that you're going to be working with. And now I'm going to pull up the instructions on the screen. And there are 3 steps to this exercise. So let me see if I can pull that up. And I think, thank you, Annie, you've also shared it. So you can write this down if you're not in a position to be writing, then just going through this as a thought process is fine too. But what we're going to do is work on this for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll go into breakout groups to share our experience, and then we'll come back. So this is something that we will be sharing with each other, but you don't have to go into the details of the story about the thing that's bugging you. You can just put that in shorthand or whatever works for you. So step 1 is the balanced attention, the mindful attention. You're writing this letter to yourself. So dear, and insert your own name. And this is an example. I know that you are feeling disappointed, etc. You were feeling disappointed because you were trying to do something, or you were looking forward to something. So whatever you do, whatever your example is, write about both the suffering that's happening and the core need underneath it. So that's step 1. So I'll give you 2 minutes to just jot something down about that using that format. So mentioning your suffering and the need beneath it. This is something that's alive for you today. So taking 1 more minute to think about this suffering you're experiencing today, acknowledging the feelings, emotions, or thoughts, and also seeing if you can acknowledge the need beneath that suffering. Okay, and now moving on to step 2. And if you've not quite finished step 1, that's fine. You can keep working on that. Step 2 is the common humanity phase. So something like, write something like, oh, you know, everybody feels like this sometimes, or humans make mistakes. Something that recognizes that whatever you're experiencing is part of the human condition, and not in a dismissive way, but just acknowledging that this is part of life. And you as an earthling are also subject to it. So taking a minute or two for the common humanity. Okay, good. So now let's try to move on to step 3. Try to zoom this in a little bit more. So this is where the rubber really hits the road. Self-kindness. So mentoring yourself with some compassionate support and encouragement in the direction of your intention. So this is key, I think. What would you say to a loved one in this situation? So if you find this really hard to do for yourself, just imagine that you're responding to a friend, someone you really want the best for. And if this feels so, some people just find this feels so contrived doing this for themselves. Well, that's because you're kind of having to respond to the weight of a lot of habit and conditioning. So of course it's going to feel kind of weird. But if that's like inhibiting you, how weird it feels, then just imagine you're writing to a friend. And here's an example that you can read if you'd like to. And once you've read it, had a look, let's take 2 or 3 minutes to try and write something like this to yourself, even if it feels really weird. Remember, you're talking to yourself like you would speak to a good friend that you wanted the best for. Just taking another minute to finish this off, and it doesn't have to be perfect or complete. The idea is just to get yourself into the habit of relating to your own experience with this friendliness.